Hello, we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking specifically about theoretical frameworks. Here we go. So, theoretical frameworks, or sometimes called conceptual frameworks, and we'll get to that. So, first, let's take a few moments to draw. What I'd like you to do is grab a piece of paper, scratch paper, it doesn't matter. You're not going to show it to me, and um, it's not going to go anyplace other than I want you to think about it. I want you to create a sketch of how a person learns. You can definitely use stick people, include speech bubbles and thought bubbles. You can have a single picture or you can have a series of pictures like a storyboard. Don't take a really long time doing this. I have a timer for 2 minutes. So I'm going to set the timer and then give you 2 minutes, and then we're going to talk about it. Don't skip ahead. Make sure you take the 2 minutes and draw your idea of how a person learns. Okay, now that you have that drawn, I want you to think about what your theory is about learning. Keep that in mind as we talk about the next couple of things. So generally, everybody has theories about things, and you have a theory about your research. You might not have a name to it yet, though you may have. Quite often, our theories are basically how we think things work in the world. And we develop these things based on our personal experiences and observations. And we think to ourselves, this is how this happens. Quite often, our common or personal theories are very interdisciplinary, that they go across different spaces in life. But the big thing is, if we don't have formal knowledge of theories, we might not have a name for it. And so you may be at that place right now that you have an inkling of how you think something might work, but you don't have a name for it. And a lot of times we have these theories because of, and especially in education, because of our interactions with others. So sitting in the teacher's lounge and talking about a particular student or a particular lesson, other people share their experiences of how something works. And so they bring their theories, and then once you try it, it becomes part of your set of theories. So, what I'd like you to do right now is pause this for a moment and chat with somebody you know about your theory of learning. And if you need to, call a friend. Otherwise, just grab whoever's in the house or the apartment with you, even if it is your pet, your cat, your dog, your bird, your goat, whatever. Articulate your theory of learning. Pause the video and then come back. Okay, did you pause? Did you articulate your theory of learning? Now, do you have a name for it? That's what we're going to be talking about next. A theoretical or conceptual framework, and we'll talk a little bit about the difference, but right now let's just assume there is no difference. Let's use the word theoretical to mean both theoretical and conceptual. It is a roadmap for your dissertation, and it's really important. It guides your study from chapter 1 to chapter 5. It connects your research to existing knowledge, and it shows its significance to the field. It helps you maintain your focus, because if you're using this particular theory, you're not able to veer off here because that's going into a different theory. So it keeps you on track. It helps you add credibility to it, that it is not just my experience, but it's backed up with other people's research and theories of teaching, learning, interaction, change, whatever it is. Your theoretical framework also is a huge part of analyzing your data. So you need to have a clear understanding of what your theoretical framework is as you write chapter 3. And you're going to be looking at this quite often in chapter 2. A good chunk of it will be the explanation of your theoretical framework. Now, that sometimes is a little bit different if you shift your conceptual framework into chapter 3 and you describe it there. That's okay too. But you're going to describe it somewhere, either chapter 2 or chapter 3, with just touching on it in chapter 1. It also helps with generalizing. And so as you look at what your data is, you analyze it with this theory. People can look at other studies using a similar theory to yours to see how they connect. Now, I have that picture there because I know many people feels like this woman, that theoretical frameworks give me a headache. I don't know what my theory is. Or every time I encounter one, I want to use it. So one of the things to remember, that if you are beginning your research, you're probably in what I call the swirl. So it's like a big funnel. Again, if you imagine, you'll see this quite often in an airport or sometimes in a shopping mall when they want to collect money. There's this big funnel where you put a coin in, and up in the top, it goes really, really long arcs because it's a big circle. And then as it keeps coming down, it goes faster and faster and faster and faster until it drops. So if you're beginning your study, you're up here in the swirl, you're encountering a lot of things and you're thinking about a lot of things. And so your research, your question, your theory, your understanding of it is very confusing because it could be all of these possible things. So you're in the swirl, and that is okay. That's where you should be at the beginning of a study. You're in the swirl, you're working on looking at the literature, how other people have approached it. And then you're narrowing things down. And so part of research is going from this very broad, I could do this, 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 this. I could use this, 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 and this for my theoretical framework. I could use this, this, or this for my methodology. All of this is swirling up here. And a big part of your work in the beginning is saying, nope, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that. And so you're narrowing and narrowing and narrowing till you get to a doable, accomplishable research study for a dissertation. And remember the two main rules of Dr. Porath and dissertations. The best dissertation is a done dissertation, and the dissertation is just the beginning, not the ending. And so all of the things that you're saying, I'm not going to do this and I'm not going to do this, put it in your parking lot. Park it there for when you're done with your dissertation, you can move on and do more of that work. So back to theoretical frameworks. Now, there are three basic families of theoretical frameworks, and they generally align under positivism, interpretism, and critical theory. So when we look at ontology, which is a word you probably encountered in another class, but basically ontology is what is the nature of reality? And so theories under positivism, objective reality exists independently. And so your data is objective, your researcher is objective, that reality is what it is. Interpretism says that there are multiple subjective realities, that everybody has a different perspective. And when you bring in critical theories, those realities are shaped by power dynamics of position, of money, of location, of race and ethnicity, etc. Now, epistemology is how is reality and knowledge measured? So for theories that are under positivism, you can measure reality through observation and some sort of measurement. So because reality exists independently, you can specifically measure. You can take a tape measure, you can measure it. Interpretism says that it is subjective and it's being interpreted by the researcher. And so the reality of the participant and the reality of the researcher may not be the same thing. And so the researcher needs to work hard to make sure that their position, their positionality is articulated clearly enough that they can see when the researcher's experiences is impinging on understanding the participants' experiences. Now, under critical theory, knowledge or reality is very much part of the social context. So it's not just an individual participant, but it's a participant within a context. So even though they have a reality, that reality is very much influenced by the social context. And so that needs to be taken into consideration. So with a research focus for those theories under positivism, you're going to be looking at mostly quantitative and measurable phenomenon. And so the researcher is going to be objective and detached. And interpretism or interpretivist theories, generally it's going to be qualitative, looking at lived experiences. And so the researcher is part of the research. So in interpretivist theories or perspectives, the researcher influences the research, whether they're actively engaged in the situation or just observing. Either way, their choice of doing that research, being in the context, is already changing what's happening. For critical theories and things that lie under that, the researcher is social activist, recognizing that the power dynamics that are happening in the social context with the participants, the researcher is trying to help them also understand it and seek change. And so data is going to be more dialectic. It's going to have the participants have some critical reflection, potentially participatory action research, where their participants are actually part of the research, not just observation and taking data from, but co-constructing the research. So when you look at the goals of the research, they're a little different. So those theories under positivism, the goal is to have a very objective and generalizable finding. Interpretism, recognizing that it is subjective and it's very context specific. And so with enough studies that are, say, qualitative case studies in different contexts, but on the same phenomenon, you can compare case studies across each other to get a broader understanding, and that's what a meta-analysis is. For critical theory, the goal of the research is really to uncover and then challenge power structures within the context and the participants. Generally, those theories under positivism is basically saying this is what it is. There's limited focus on changing the situation. Interpretism acknowledges it and tries to reveal hidden aspects, but may not make changes. But the whole point of research under a critical theory perspective is to change the system, the inequalities and injustices. So with that being said, the methodologies are going to be a little bit different. Under positivism, where things are very objective and easy to measure, you're going to do things like experimental design, statistical analysis, content analysis, which is counting things within text or within images. Interpretivism very much leans on qualitative, things like interviews, ethnography, case studies, narrative inquiry, etc. If you're coming from a critical theory perspective, you'll be using things like critical discourse analysis, participatory action research. Ethnography can be critical depending on how you use it. Case study can be critical depending on what theory you bring into it. So why is that important? When you are looking at your theoretical framework and your methodology and your methods, so your theoretical framework or conceptual framework are the theories you're bringing into the research. Your methodology is a framework for how you're going to collect and use data. And so that's experimental design or case study, quantitative or qualitative. And then your methods specifically is the instruments you are using. All of these things need to align. That if you're positivist all the way through. If you're interpretivist all the way through. If you're a critical theorist, you're critical all the way through. So the epistemology provides us knowledge. Ontology checks to see if it exists, and then axiology checks if it's moral values, if it is right or wrong. So you're going to be thinking about these things through your study, and it should be aligned. So very quickly, I'm going to go through a couple of theories so you can see some of the differences, because quite often people start out with way too broad of a theory and don't recognize that they need to narrow down the theoretical framework even more. So coming from a positivist perspective, one of many versions of theories that fit under positivism is a theory called determinism that basically says events, including human actions, are predetermined by causes or natural laws. So when we look at determinism, there's a whole bunch of them, and I'm not going to read them all to you. But just so you know that there are different ones, and this is what they look like, from biological, technological, economic, behavior, social, etc. So I have a definition for each of them, and then I have a study listed underneath that is a demonstration of that particular type of theory. So one of the things we're seeing right now a lot is the technological determinism. We see this a lot with technology, and right now with AI, there's a lot of technological determinism of AI is going to destroy the world, and people are going to be out of work and things like that. So the determinism tends to be on how it's going to change society, and quite often you will see it in a negative light, though it can certainly be in a very positive light, but it tends to be in a negative one. So technology changes society by the fact that it is technology. And when you think about AI now and how big of a difference it is making and will be making, we're all kind of reeling from that. But think back to the origins of a pencil. Socrates thought it was a horrible idea that people wrote things down, because then they wouldn't memorize and remember things. If they had a second brain, which is a theory, they wouldn't have to remember it. So Socrates was horrified by the idea of writing things down. So we've had this cycle quite frequently. So here's a couple of different versions of determinism. Now, if you look at interpretivism, constructivism is a very large umbrella theory that encompasses a bunch of different types of constructivist theories. So here's just a few of them, and there's more than this. Social constructivism, social cognitive theory, situated learning theory, and experiential learning theory. And again, here's the definitions and the studies that give some examples of it. So I'm very much an interpretivist and very much a constructivist. One of the theories that I tend to do a lot of work under constructivism is dialogic pedagogy. It's not listed here, but basically constructivism basically says, as we see here, individuals construct their own knowledge and understanding of the world. And so even though two people might read the same book at the same time in the same situation, like a classroom, constructivism says both of them will get two very different understandings of that book because they are constructing their own meaning. So critical theory, and again, there's a bunch of other theories under critical theory. One of the broad umbrellas is critical pedagogy, but basically the framework is focuses on challenging and transforming social inequities, fostering specifically critical thinking, and promoting social justice. So that's the broad umbrella. But under critical pedagogy, there is more specific theories coming out of, say, Paulo Freire, who talks about writing the word to write the world. So how literacy can change the world that the people are involved in. Critical multiculturalism, critical literacy, and democratic pedagogy are all examples of critical pedagogy. Now, critical literacy is another broad umbrella, and even under critical literacy, there are, so here, critical literacy, so let's go back. Critical theory, up here, narrow down, critical pedagogy, narrow down one more, critical literacy, narrow down one more. New literacy studies, multiliteracies, critical media literacy, post-colonial literacy, critical digital literacy, and critical literacy for social justice are more specific underneath critical literacy. So you're going to be asked, if you're using a theoretical framework that already exists, you're going to be asked to really name it. And you may be coming from a constructivist perspective, but you need to narrow it down, or you may be coming from a critical perspective, but then you need to narrow it down. So if you remember something like this back in your high school science class, that there's the scientific names and classifications of animals. And the difference between a coyote and a gray wolf comes down to the species. And so this is, again, if you think about critical theory, critical pedagogy, critical literacy, and then or new literacies would be the really specific thing. And new literacies is different than post-colonial literacy theory. And so that's the difference between the coyote and the gray wolf. So think about how far you need to narrow down what your theoretical framework is. So here's an example of a really short summary of what my dissertation was that I did at UW-Madison, and I deposited it in August of 2013. So this interpretive case study takes a constructivist approach through the application of dialogic pedagogy theory. So there's my specific one. So it's interpretive, constructivist, dialogic pedagogy. To understand how two third-grade teachers use collaborative reflection to examine how the teachers made changes in their practice and thinking to promote a more dialogic classroom, and how they managed the conflicts that arose through the shift of teaching and learning expectations. So in the green is case study. So that is my methodology. Now, within that, I was looking at a couple of constructs, and that's in the blue. I was looking at their collaborative reflection and how that impacted their changes in practice and thinking specifically. And so I was looking at practice and thinking, and they had to articulate that. And that's part of dialogic pedagogy. And they also wanted to have their classroom more dialogic. So the students were talking to each other, not just to the teacher. Now, because this was such a big shift, they had a lot of conflicts. They had internal conflicts about how did this work or not work with what their own personal theories of teaching and learning was, but also how did they manage the conflict when they were this very dialogic classroom where the classroom next to them was not. And then making this shift, how did they manage the conflict with the families who this was something very different? So think about a study that either you've done, if you've done a pilot study, or a study that you've read. What's the framework that's there? Can you name it? So what you need to really take out of this is that a theoretical framework is a lens. With that lens, you see some things in your study, but you don't see other things, and that's okay. You can't see everything and still write a dissertation. That would be a 600-page chronicle. Your theoretical frame keeps you narrowed and focused. But again, you're only going to see some things, and you're not going to see, or you're going to ignore some other things based on your theoretical framework. Now, let's talk about theoretical framework versus conceptual. Now, many people actually use the terms interchangeably, which really adds to the confusion. Some people define the difference as theoretical framework is an existing theory that you're adopting, like a single theory. So dialogic pedagogy was my theoretical framework for my entire dissertation. And anything I did coming out of that fell underneath that main theory. And so if the theoretical framework is existing theory, a conceptual framework is created or synthesized. Sometimes researchers say, well, I want to use this theory and this theory, which is fine. But then you have to show how the two theories work together. And that's when you end up creating a model. So perhaps you go to the chart art in Word or in PowerPoint that has the hierarchy or relationships, and you literally draw out how the two things are together. Now, other people talk about theoretical framework as something very big, where the conceptual is the narrow part. And even some people think theoretical frameworks is for quantitative study and conceptual framework is qualitative. So what should you get out of this? Check with your major professor, because that's the person who is really guiding and directing you in your dissertation. So check with your major professor about their definition of theoretical or conceptual framework and what their preference is of what you use. But the other thing you should take out of this is your theoretical or conceptual framework flows throughout the study. It should be indicated in your problem statement in chapter 1, and it's going to influence the way you ask your research question. It guides your literature review. It aligns your methods and methodology. It shows up in your data analysis and certainly in your data interpretation. If you use a different framework, you then have a different study, because as the lens you put on, you can see some things, but not everything. Apply a different framework, you're going to see something completely different. So that is a overview of theoretical frameworks and why they are so important. And it's one of the things you're going to be working on as you're framing your research question and you're moving into your literature review.